I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
We need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is What's Next, a dedicated hour to have important conversations about the issues facing the marginalized and underrepresented communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario.
If we're going to have some real healing, we've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truth.
What's Next continues our mission to discuss race,
equity,
and the common concerns of Buffalo's East Side and beyond.
In the suburban area, everywhere, we must work and teach our children.
Good morning. This is What's Next. As we celebrate Juneteenth all this week, we wanted to take a moment to revisit a conversation with WBFO's reporter Holly Kirkpatrick from February of this year. Holly sat with Lisa Jacobs-Watson, who at the time of this interview had an exhibit at the downtown Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. As this episode focuses on Black Barbie, we wanted to revisit a standout conversation surrounding the impact of Black dolls in the community. Here is Holly's story.
This is WBFO. I'm Holly Kirkpatrick. When you remember the first doll you played with as a child, perhaps you become misty-eyed with nostalgia, or cringe at the time you cut off all her hair. But did you ever realise the part she played in your perception of yourself and your place in the world? Well, an exhibit of black dolls in downtown Buffalo toys with that very question. I visited the exhibit, which shares stories of Black history and the power of representation, and I spoke with the curator, Lisa Jacobs-Watson. When she hears the word royalty, she thinks of the following.
What we consider in the Black culture as a queen, a number one boss on top of her game.
Recognizing royalty is the theme of this year's Black Doll exhibit at the Central Branch of the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library, which has been happening every February since 2020 in celebration of Black History Month.
So if I come across a doll that is dressed like a queen or a princess or gives that vibe, then I'm all about adding it to my collection.
That collection currently totals 200 dolls, according to Lisa, around 20 of which are on display in this year's exhibit. There are fictional characters such as Ariel from Disney's The Little Mermaid, as well as dolls that represent real-life inspirational Black women. Figures such as civil rights activist Rosa Parks and NASA mathematician Katherine Johnson. But Lisa says her favourite section this year presents Black dolls either designed, created or manufactured by people of colour.
As a collector, as a curator, it's about the meaning behind the doll. And I do go a little bit deeper with who's manufacturing it and how are they manufacturing it? And is it accurately representing a person of colour? Is it just a white doll that you painted black and threw a wig on it? As opposed to a doll that was manufactured by the heart of someone who really wanted to appeal to a person of color and wanted that parent and that child to truly embrace beauty, higher self-esteem, and know that they can reach the stars regardless of what they look like.
And dolls can be a powerful indicator of a person's self-perception. In fact, the exhibit tells of a scientific experiment that arguably proves just that. In the 1940s, the doll test was carried out by psychologists Kenneth and Mamie Clark in an attempt to study the development of self-esteem in Black children. In the test, which was carried out on many children separately, 2 dolls were placed in front of each child. 1 doll was black and 1 doll was white. Then each child was asked a series of questions.
For example, which is the nice doll? Which doll do you like? Which doll do you prefer? Those types of questions. And more often than not, the children preferred the white doll.
The Clarks found that prejudice, discrimination, and segregation had negatively impacted how Black children saw themselves in the world. And over a decade later, the study underpinned the argument against racial segregation in schools in the 1954 U.S. Supreme Court case Brown v. Board of Education. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court justices unanimously found that racial segregation in schools was unconstitutional.
I always use that as a backdrop to get people to think about how far we've come with dolls, how far we've come with society, and then again, just tying it back to how effective dolls can be.
And perhaps that effectiveness has played out in Lisa's own life. She says that although black dolls were scarce when she was a little girl, by the time her own daughter was playing with dolls in the 80s and 90s, lots more were available.
And I jumped on it. I bought the dolls. I loved the fact that my daughter could see these cool dolls, and it worked out.
And when she says it worked out, she means it. Lisa's daughter is chair of the Erie County Legislature, April Baskin, who's also sponsored the exhibit.
She came up with the idea, and we did this to celebrate Black history.
Holly Kirkpatrick, WBFO News.
When we return, we will have the host of Group Chat, Bentley's conversation with Professor in Theater and Africana Studies at Buffalo State University, Naila Ansari, on What's Next on WBFO.
Hey, educators. You've been asking for it, and it's here. Reading Rainbow Stories is ready to help your students stay on track. Each story is paired with activities to help students strengthen cross-curricular skills, such as math and business in Lemonade for Sale.
Let's keep track of our sales.
Science and health in Germs Make Me Sick.
Usually, you feel better after a day or two.
Thanks.
But if you don't, you should see a doctor.
And history in Following the Drinking Gourd.
One of the worst things about slavery is that families were separated. Fathers, mothers, and children were oftentimes sold to different people.
Check out the new Reading Rainbow Stories collection on PBS Learning Media today to help your students stay on track.
Discover the intersection of musical expression and emotional introspection. Listen to Mindful Music, hosted by mental health care worker Carl Shallowhorn. Saturdays at 4 p.m. and Sundays at 8 p.m. on WBFO.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we will work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using whatsnext@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
This is What's Next. Good morning. I'm Bentley, host of Group Chat, but today I'm honored to be here once again hosting What's Next. Today we're talking about the highly anticipated Netflix documentary that is coming out tomorrow, Black Barbie. And today's guest is a familiar voice on WBFO, but hasn't been on this show in a minute. It's fitting that we have her on. Professor in Theater and in Africana Studies at Buffalo State University, choreographer and dance director, Naila Ansari. Yeah, it's so great to have you. To get into this, we're just going to play the trailer for the movie, Black Barbie.
If you've gone your whole life and you've never seen anything made in your own image, there is damage done.
When I think of Barbie, I see a little white doll with blue eyes in all pink. That's what I think.
I just found Barbie to be a little light-skinned.
Years ago, there were no black dolls. They were all white dolls.
Little white girls, they could see possibility in their Barbies.
And there was nothing that I could relate to.
This is me and the creator of Barbie. At Mattel's, I worked on the lines. She would say, "Do you have any suggestions?" I was able to say, "We want a black Barbie."
That was a little act of revolution.
Crowning this doll as Barbie was telling the world Black is beautiful too.
I designed Black Barbie to reflect the total look of a Black woman.
She's Black, she's beautiful, she's dynamite.
I thought Black Barbie felt magical.
From a young age, children can learn about inclusiveness.
Really pretty as looks, just like me.
Black Barbie was just taking me to a whole different world.
I knew Black Barbie was different, but I never realized the magnitude. When did you first fall in love with Black Barbie?
When I first got one in my hand.
So with that trailer, Naila, do you have memories of Black Barbie?
I do. I'm so excited. It's funny because I watched the trailer over and I was like, oh my gosh, I remember when I first got my first Black Barbie that I can remember. I remember my mom and my aunts, they would give me like black dolls all the time. But I do remember I was laughing because I had a little Brandy doll. And that was, Cinderella and all like that whole thing that came out with, having these celebrities and these black dolls and having dolls that looked like you. Because typically when you went in the store, you were like going through all of these different dolls that looked nothing like you. And then you just maybe happened to find that one if you had money to get a like Mattel, right? If not, you were getting like the off-brand ones at the store that were just kind of like makeshift Barbie. But yeah, I definitely remember just being so excited and just like really having a collection. And I didn't do them well. Like I should have been a better collector because I was trying to be like a hairdresser with my Barbie dolls.
I wonder, I got in trouble for cutting the hair off my Barbies, and now I know why, because I guess, they're probably worth money. I get in trouble, but I know why. Like everybody thought they were going to be worth money, and they probably would be now.
I know, I messed up there. It was like, now I look at all these collectors and I'm like, oh man, mine were, they're somewhere gone.
Well, and so it was 1980 when Black Barbie came out, and Barbie came out in 1959. That's a huge stretch. And also 1980 is not that long ago.
It's a huge stretch. And so Kitty Black Perkins, who they talk about in the documentary, she's the one that designed for Mattel, and she actually ended up retiring as the lead designer for Mattel. It's interesting because she creates a Black Barbie doll that really like intensifies the idea of like what it means to be a Black woman, and like the swag. We use the term swag now of like a Black woman. Like this Barbie had her earrings, her hair was laid, the outfit was gathered and together. And so for us to have a shift of such a long period of time and have a Black Barbie that's not a friend. And, we had talked about this before we started, and like it's so interesting because people get a little confused on like the actual like first Black Barbie versus like Barbie's friends, which is like you see the Francie and Christy, which was 67 and 68.
Yep.
So,
well, and they weren't prominent. Like I was talking to you before today that I grew up in a very rural area, right? So I just assumed, all the Barbies, it was all white Barbies.
Right.
And so I was asking you, like, if your experience was different, and your experience really wasn't different.
Mine was very much similar. Like you would go in the store and it's like might have like that one token Black Barbies, because it really depends on where you live that you might have access to some of like those Black Barbies that were coming out, particularly like later on. You had celebrity Barbies that they would have for a moment, right? There was like Julia with Diane Carroll, and I think that was like 69. So for the most part, you were still seeing pretty much the same thing, and you just had that like one, maybe two Black Barbies that were coming, that were like in trend at the time. So you still weren't really having this idea of like what it meant to be like beautiful, right? And so you have, for such a long period of time, you just are seeing this ideal of like what it is to be this like beautiful woman in America, which is actually problematic for all women, because who's looking like that? Like even with the Barbie movie, I was kind of like, we're still doing this,
And the dimensions weren't like, I remember when they came out with like the actual dimensions of Barbie, they were just not physically possible on a woman.
At all. Right. And so we got into a lot of issues across the board in terms of like this idea of like the feminine, this idea of like the woman and the Barbie. And then you exacerbate that when you like don't see a Barbie that looks like you. Right. And so when Black Barbie comes out in the 80s, this is like a big deal for everyone, because you're trying to push against so many stereotypes that were before that. But then also this notion of like what it means to be the ideal kind of like woman that we've all kind of pushed with these stereotypes, which is, always been problematic.
And children learn through play. Like that's a big learning thing. And that's how they, learn in your early years. So do you think that Barbie and how Barbie was released, and you were talking about the outfits and the hair, do you think that it was an accurate portrayal? Do you think that helped with stereotypes, and do you think it was empowering?
I think at the time it was. I think now we've understand the complexities of Blackness, because, similar to what we were talking about with the white Barbie dolls, is like all white women don't look like that either. And so, but for the 80s, like you're coming out of the civil rights movement and you're having like this Barbie that like has this natural hair that's like loving her skin. So for the time it was amazing, but where we still see the identities and what it looks like, I still think we have ways to go, because we're not a monolith. Like we don't all look like, because like Black Barbie's still thin, right? Like You know, unless you're on Ozempic or something, you're not looking like Barbie, right? Like, and so that's the kind of the notion is like when we have this idea of something that comes out and we feel like it's for us, that's just the starting point of like where it needs to go. So it really reflects who we are as a culture, as a people, and all of our identities.
And you mentioned a starting point. Mm-hmm. So I know in the documentary they mentioned that this also started a wave of other Barbies. Mm-hmm. How successful do you think that was, and how important do you think that was? I know they tried like the American Girl doll route to be more representative, but there's still some things that could probably be improved, right?
Right. It's always difficult, I think, sometimes with kids because when you don't have historical context to it, it's still it can just be a thing, right? Like there's play, but then there's also like understanding why the play is important and like historically what's been happening and why is it a big deal that we have these dolls that look like you or look like someone else or look like friends of yours. I think we always miss it, which I think American Girl doll tried to do with the books, but when they're kind of like on this basic level and not really digging into a deeper understanding of like why all of a sudden do we have an Addie and Josephine doll? Yeah, right? Like those conversations don't tend to happen. It's just we just look at our new doll, like we're so happy, and then look at the culture that comes with it. Like Addie's a slave, and now so these I think we have to do better as a society and as a culture to be able to understand the true history that comes along with a lot of these dolls that we play with and to helping our children understand it as well.
And one of the women in the trailer said, I designed Black Barbie to reflect the total look of a Black woman. And I know you mentioned the earrings and the dress. Did you feel that they did a good job at that?
I think for the time they did. Yeah, right. I think if it were today, you see Black women that can be in a space that are like, a Nikki Giovanni that is very poised and academic in her look. Or you can have somebody that's like that's like a Nicki Minaj. Like that's also a look. There's such a complexity and an understanding that I don't think that we fully have captured in terms of Black women. And so we tend to say like this is the idea of what the Black woman is, and typically it's the idea of what we want Black women to look like so that we have a respect for them, right? Because the notion is like if someone looks like a Cardi B, we don't tend to have the same respect for them because of what we associate them as, culturally. So I think in a world of like respectability politics, that was the great Black Barbie, and that someone can aspire to work and be educated and be strong, but that's not necessarily everybody's pathway, and everybody doesn't, may not want to look like that. You might have a Black woman that wants to be in a rock band.
Well, and and that was going to be my next question for you is what would you like to see Barbies doing? What should they, because like, with the white Barbie, the initial, it was, you have the tennis outfit. Right. You know what I mean? It's like, can we be a doctor?
We're going to the country club. Yeah. Well, I think part of it is that we can do everything. And I think that's the notion that I think Barbie tries to get to and Mattel tries to get to is like we're having the veterinarian and like we can go into the sciences and women can do all these different things that are like educational and women can like not just be domesticated in the house and like all of these different types of ideals of what we think the woman should be. But I do think there's other ways of going about it. It's like a lot of them are also still these kind of standard jobs that people tend to think are really good jobs that put people up on a pedestal. But there's a lot of jobs and work that people do behind the scenes that are equally important as someone being a physician or someone being an attorney or someone being a politician. And I think we tend to push our girls into those types of directions, which is great, but that doesn't necessarily mean it serves everyone, right? Like I, haven't seen a Barbie yet that's like, I'm doing major tech and building a startup company.
Right.
Like, what does that Barbie look like?
Or, or a bus driver or a daycare worker or a
producer or you know what I mean?
Right?
Like, or we tend to put these celebrities at the top of the food chain, or we tend to put these jobs that make a lot of money on this American standard at the top of the list. But we have so many other jobs that people do in America that women are in, that Black women are in, that are complete control, professional, amazing at what they do. And, I think we need to do a little bit better at that.
When you played with Barbies, what were some of the things that you had your Barbies do? Were they, go to the country club? Were they giving speeches in front of Congress?
I had two brothers, so my Barbies were always wrestling. My brothers had like the G.I. Joes, and so I don't know if you remember China at the time, so my Barbies, I had my Barbies as wrestlers, and then I grew, obviously dancing in theater. So my Barbies would be like dancing and doing all types of stuff like that were like in the performance field. But I never had my Barbie like cooking or cleaning or anything like that. Like that wasn't my thing. We were wrestling. I always had them like swimming in the bathtub. That was like they were like swimmers at one point. They were war zone, like they were like battling with the G.I. Joes that my brothers had. So it was not anything that was typical of what people thought Barbie should be.
But it's interesting then to see your path, right?
That's true.
You could like psychoanalyze. Like, I mean, getting ready for this, I was thinking, I never had a Ken.
Oh, I had a Ken. I had a black Ken.
You had a Ken?
I did. Mm-hmm, I did have a Ken.
Yeah, I didn't think I needed a Ken, but it's what did Ken ever do? Ken was just kind of there,
just
right?
Came in the set. I think I got it for like a gift, and he was just with the G.I. Joes. I just put him in G.I. Joe, and we were just fighting. That was what it was. But again, it's different. I grew up with brothers, so that's just a different dynamic, and I was the youngest.
No, I mean, and my Barbie the hair was never done, so now never change the outfit either. It's like, oh, we're going from, tennis to out to dinner. And my friends would be like, yeah, we're going out to dinner. You got to change the outfit. I'm like, no, I don't. It's kind of a pain,
It's too much. I did do the hair because that was like always the thing in Black households. It's like you were getting your hair braided. So I was trying to do the same things that my mom was doing to the dolls, but that never worked because like the head was so small. And then the hair really wasn't good after you washed it and like was putting shampoo. I'd learned that the hard way. Like you can't take care of it like you would like put grease and stuff in it that I was doing. It didn't work on the Barbie doll's hair, so we just ended up cutting.
And they're always in the pool.
Mess, yeah.
Well, and that was actually another thing I wanted to talk about. And the girl in the trailer that was saying she looks like me and touched her hair. Why is the hair so important?
The hair is so important because that's our crown. And there's so many different ways in which we do it. Like we've seen different Barbies that also like have the crown is in terms of like head wraps too. So it's not necessarily always like literal in terms of hair. It can also quite literally be like the crown of like physical like hair wrapping as well, because we've always, even, before we can even think of the Barbie existing, there's different ways like your hair would be braided in terms of finding different routes to get to freedom when you're on the Underground Railroad. Like there's all these different hairstyles that you've tried to upkeep so that you can maintain your hair, because it's not an easy practice as a lot of people think it is. Like when every Black woman has a different type of hair, and you have to take care of it very differently, and you have to maintain it to keep it healthy. So our hair becomes a part of us, and it really becomes a cultural understanding of who we are, right? Like you can grow up and you're going to your grandmother's house and she's using like putting that hot comb on a stove and hot combing your hair, and like the Sunday, like everybody's getting their hair washed, right? That Sunday wash day, hair, conditioner, braid it up, put your wrap on, get ready to go. You done for the week. And sometimes if it was good, you lasted 2 weeks. Yeah. And so that's always been such a cultural part of who we are, but it's also quite literally been a form of our liberation too. So to have a Barbie that's like their texture hair is one that we can identify. It's like, okay, this is what I'm talking about, because we were all not having silky strands of like, this straight hair.
Yep. And there was judgment around hair.
Oh, totally. Right. And luckily, we did have the civil rights movement, so the afros were really prominent in different braids and different hairstyles that were coming out. And Black women, like especially, we're super creative with the hair. We will do like you can see somebody on a Monday and the hairstyle will be totally different on Tuesday, right? It look like a totally different person just because like I want to put a wig on today. I'm gonna wear my natural hair on Tuesday, and on Wednesday I'm gonna just braid it up, and that's what's gonna be, right? So that's just who we are as Black women, because that quite literally shows who we are. It shows our liberation. It shows our strength. But it also shows our creativity, and it shows our way of being. I always say it's like our space of creating possibilities out of impossibilities that people try to put in our way.
Yeah. Why is it important that 3 Black women created Black Barbie? Because, I mean, in marketing, this isn't always the case. When our products, they're not always created by Black people for Black people.
It's true. That was what I was surprised about with the trailer and doing research behind it. I was like, oh, wow, this is like actually a Black woman. Because so often when you're in those, especially in corporate, you might have one Black person that comes to the room and they're like, what do you think about this? And it's always difficult because your job tends to be on the line. So most people will try to figure out, I guess, if they don't agree, they find a nice way to say they don't agree. But to have an actual Black designer that knows and sees Black women, that's a complete game changer when it comes to corporate. Because we see it now, like different corporations are putting all types of things out that like they're getting backlash from because they're like, who told you to do this? Like, why are a group of white people making decisions on like what should be sold to the Black community? That's ridiculous.
Right.
So to have someone like Kitty Black Perkins to be a designer and a lead designer before she retires is super important because she understands those nuances like I just talked about of getting your hair done in the kitchen at your grandmother's house and having those days where you're playing dress up with your sisters, cousins, friends, and doing different hair and different braiding styles.
Yeah. Well, and especially when they created the Barbie in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of representation in the boardrooms in corporations.
No, even now.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
You go into a corporation, you see some like especially a Black woman, you walk and that's in the higher up, you're like, in the C-suites, it's like you have to double take some time. So for that to happen in the 80s and have someone that you felt proud of, right? Like even though I talked earlier about Black women being complex and having different identities and understanding that we all don't look the same, at that time period, that was important because you really weren't seeing Black women at all. Like we were still thinking of Black women as like the Sapphires or the Mammies and the Jezebels, that was in the Winches. Like that's what, that was what was so pervasive since 1828 with like Jim Crow. Like those, that has been the ideals of like who Black women have been in America for such a long time that when you see this idea of like Black excellence and swaggy, right? Like she wasn't just like in a suit, like she wasn't wearing like the Hillary Clinton suit. Like she was diva down in that red dress with the gold.
Yeah. Now, did you know anything about these designers? I guess I'm kind of shocked that this story hasn't been told before.
No, I mean, even when I'm like looking up things, it was more recent, like just because the 40th anniversary was 2020. So like that was when I was kind of like, oh, okay, that was kind of surprised by that because you still think Barbie's soul is very white, right? Like even the movie, I was like, okay, like I'm glad Issa Rae was the president, but like, okay, it's still pervasively white. And so to know that you had Black women in those rooms to make those decisions for Black women is really important.
Why do you think the documentary is coming out now? I know there was big success with the Barbie movie. Why is it important that it's coming out now? It's being released on Juneteenth, but, this year in particular.
Well, it's got amazing reviews from these different festivals, but I think it's coming out now because we're in a watershed moment in the U.S. right now. Like politically, it's really difficult. The Fearless Fund recently, they're no longer, they just ruled that they're no longer allowed to give Black women grants in businesses. So like there's a major attack on Black women and the success of Black women, specifically Black women in business, which is a lot of the models that we see for Barbie are Black women, in business that are super educated and successful. And there's a major attack and threat on Black women right now. So this is coming out honestly at the perfect time because the ruling literally just happened.
Yep.
And that ruling is really showing like that we don't want to see Black women succeed because we know what Black women can do, right? Like Black women have always been the anchors in this country to success, right? And we talk about the civil rights movement. We even talk about enslaved Africans going to freedom. Everyone knows about Harriet Tubman, but they don't really understand that strength that you have as a Black woman to lead that many people to freedom and have that liberation. Black women have always been at the forefront of Black liberation in this country. And white men, successful white men tend to know that. right? A lot of people they underestimate because of the stereotypes that come out about Black women, but Black women are very keen to white men understanding their power. And that is a major threat. And historically, we've seen that as well. And we see it a lot of times in workplaces. But yeah, this is the perfect time, I think, for the trailer to come out. And, I think not for anything to advocate for Black women and also advocate for companies like the Fearless Fund that are ran by Black women.
Mm-hmm. Stay with us. There's more to come. This is What's Next on WBFO.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we will work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using whatsnext@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
Thanks for listening to What's Next. I'm Bentley, and today we are talking about the highly anticipated Netflix documentary, Black Barbie, with professor in theater and Africana Studies at Buffalo State University, choreographer and dance director, Naila Ansari.
So you have the layer of the actual Black Barbie, but the women that created the Black Barbie and the Barbie and the power that they were given to do that, which is a huge part of it.
And that's the thing, too, is like, when Black women have power, it's like when Black women prevail, we all prevail. And I think that's when a lot of people in this country don't really understand, is that we tried to be so divisive and silo within our racism and our thoughts of who people should be leading. But when we have Black women at the forefront, that only helps everybody else.
Yeah. And big things happen. And like you said, it's a threat.
It's a total threat. Because like, what? And it's like when you look at the amount of money that goes to white men specifically in business, and when you look at the ideas and the notions and the ideologies of whiteness, it almost still disgusts you, because we're still here like, oh, we're so happy that we have Black Barbie. But if you even look at the magnitude of like how many Black Barbies we have versus like, there's Black Barbie owners that are like, I have 600 in my collection, which is a ton, based off of like someone that might be talking about thousands of white Barbies, right? So we're still so divided, and the percentage is still so wide and deep that the notion is like we still have ways to go,
right? And
I think that's what the documentary is showing. Like, we are here, and we love Black women succeeding. That is our joy. Like, Black women are really the foundations of our joy in this country. Like, radical Black joy are through Black women. And so when we talk about the Black Barbie, that was such a joy for Black women, because it was one of the first times that we don't have to see Black women being maimed, Black women being raped, Black women being stereotyped, Black women being like this, I'm cussing you out all the time, like these types of stereotypes. So I think it's more important than ever, but it's also a fight, because people understand the power that Black women have.
And, as you said, there is a long ways to go because of, even visibility on its own, when you were just talking about even trying to track down these Barbies or seeing where they're. And I had to double check with you because, the research I did or what I see, I'm just not seeing them. So, which is a little symbolic.
Oh, it's true. It's like, honestly, it's like, I think of Barbie like any other corporation. It's like, okay, we got two. Like, like that's, it's like, all right, okay, cool. And then what else, right? And sometimes when you think of these spaces that we're in, and particularly Black Barbie, and I think Shonda Rhimes is doing an amazing job, is like she's using her platform to uplift something that is so beautiful to continue the journey, to keep it going. And I think Black women do that really well, is when we find something that we have to go on to, is like, we're going to promote and we're going to keep it going, because we can't allow this to stop. And so Shonda Rhimes, she's obviously made a huge name for herself. She didn't have to do this documentary. Nope. She got Bridgerton, Grey's Anatomy. She has anything under the sun, but she wants to be able to uplift Black women. And that's something that we have to have, because there's not many folks that are doing that for us.
Well, and so this definitely wasn't an easy thing for these women to come together to do this. I'm sure now it's a great, happy story, but there definitely had to be some struggles behind it, and to get noticed and to be able to, or this would have happened a long time ago.
Oh, of course. You think Barbie started out, I was like, oh, let's start to get the Black Barbie out first. Like, we had 20-something years with white Barbie before they even, and it wasn't until there was a black woman that's working on the line and said, someone's asking, well, what do you think that we should, what do you think we should do? And people will see this in the documentary. And she was like, I think y'all should have a black Barbie.
Yeah.
But that, after how many white Barbies did we have?
Right.
And that the notion that I had to ask you, that wasn't something that came to corporate's mind initially, is something that's also very telling, as well. And even still, when you think about that, it's who gets ownership of that creativity to say that we need a black Barbie, right? I would be interested to know if she got any equity for that.
Until this documentary was done, and somebody that had interest in finding out the story.
Know, right?
And, with the younger generations now, how do you, I know you work with college students. Mm-hmm. How do you empower them to do big things like this? And how do you communicate to them? Because we do have a long way to go, but like you said, if they're given power, things will happen. So how do you communicate to them, and what are some of the strategies that you communicate?
I always tell my student, I have a 8-year-old son, so I'm around kiddos all the time, but it's power in numbers. And everyone knows in their heart what's just, right? Even if you're for evil, you understand what it means to say something to the right, to do something to the right, to be justly to other folks, right? You understand on a basic level of kindness, of humanity, what someone deserves, and how to have a justice and how to have peace and love in a space. And so that's something that I navigate a lot in my own workspaces, but it's also something that I teach my students, is that if you're not going to do it in love and justice, then you don't do it at all, right? And I have to teach that because so often we get taken aback by so much about how we look that we don't understand what brings us together. Mm-hmm. And for me, you understand people for who they are, and they might not have good characters. And I think that notion gets a little mixed up too.
Right.
You might have a person that you might not like, but that doesn't mean you treat them poorly just because they may not have the best character. Right. And that's also not to say that you let anybody treat you any kind of way either. But when you have a group of people that can come together and say, hey, what you just did to this person isn't right.
Yep.
And you fight together, that's how we can win, because people doing it on their own it's a difficult and hard role. We have to come together to do it. And this movie, is definitely an example of that.
Because you can teach that at an early age. You said, you have an 8-year-old. Mm-hmm. I have a 2-year-old. They start interacting, they start learning these things at such a young age. So not only through play, but everything that you just talked about.
Right, because they don't really know that. People have been talking about this for generations, but it's taught. They don't come out the womb just being like, I don't like black people, I don't like white people, I don't like Hispanic. That's not normal, right? No. It's normal to engage in a space of love and have friendships. You might have disagreements with people, but you don't dislike someone just because of the way that they look. And so how do we fundamentally get back to the point of I want to be together for people to create a just environment for all.
Yeah. Well, and then if you think of, the ages of children that were playing with Barbies, and then you think into the teenage years, what are the things that kids are doing now that we should worry that there's representation, or we should worry that maybe they're not seeing things the way they should be seeing them?
Well, social media is a beast, and that's something we didn't have. So while it was even difficult for us growing up, because you're only really seeing kind of this ideal of what a beautiful woman should look like, and this idea of Barbie, maximize that by 1,000 plus on social media. And now that look of Barbie is no longer just Barbie, right? The movie, I think maybe helped a little bit for younger generations to understand Barbie. But for the most part, they're looking at Instagram models, they're looking at influencers, they're looking at all types of AI, driven faces and graphics and all these other things that are telling them what perfect looks like. Now these celebrities are telling them what perfect looks like. So we have a ways to go, and I get nervous because the access that a lot of these kids have, it is a lot different than I think for us. It's exacerbated on a higher level of what they understand beauty to look like. And so you're seeing a lot more, mental health issues with a lot of the younger generations. You're seeing all these conflicts that are happening between parents and their kids at home, because their parents are like, I don't want you to be on social media. And then the kid is like, everyone else is on social media. I want to be on it. So a lot of these things are just really not safe anymore. Like there's a dangerous side to it, but then there's this whole other mental health side to it where you're just trying to keep up, essentially with what the best look is at the time.
Yeah. Is that another thing that's going to require a big group effort?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think like everybody's going to have to be hands on deck. I think, it used to be the notion of like a village. It takes a village to raise a child. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've come so siloed that like everybody has all these activities. So it's like kind of, yeah, that does that. But like everyone's still pretty much in their own homes. I think we're going to have to go back to the model of really everybody really watching what their kids are doing. Right. So if you have a kid at your house with multiple friends over, what are y'all doing?
Yeah.
Right. Like, what are you watching? Like, I think I think everybody has to play a part in the appropriateness of social media.
Mm-hmm. It does take a community. And I think that's another thing we've probably gotten away from, right? Mm-hmm. And that is important in Black communities. I think that Black communities can teach everybody else.
Oh, yeah. Because there would be nothing. Like, I could go into a Black sister group right now and my child could act up and I wouldn't even have to say anything because they'll be like, absolutely not, before I even open my mouth up. Like, that's just who we are. Everybody's going to be watching everybody's child to make sure that they know right from wrong, right? And then they'll go and tell your parent that I just like, look, I just told your child off because they did X, Y, and Z. So I'm just letting you know that that's what I did. And then then the kid gets it twice because they got to go tell the parent what just happened after already getting yelled at by somebody else. And so in Black spaces, we've always been that way. Mm-hmm. But social media, I will have to say that doesn't discern us differently from other people, that social media hasn't also affected us, particularly COVID, and separating us from more of the communal spaces we hold.
And the necessity for parents to be working.
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, the economy is real. Inflation is real. People have to work. Like everyone has to figure out a way to live. We're not back, in the day with like our parents where they can pay minimum. We talked about this of like paying minimum down payments for mortgages or even just getting that. Like rent is crazy expensive across the country. So it's like what comes first is like, do I have the time to take off work to really see what my kid is doing? The answer most of the time is no, because you got to feed them too. And so I think when we talk about community and village, and the village that takes it, that's your teachers, that's a crossing guard, that's whoever it is to monitor so that we can all help our kids raise through this space of social media, because there's just so many influences coming at them. Like we had control to some extent because your parents had to buy you the Barbie, right, or your family friends or somebody had to purchase it, right? And that could be taken away. It's a thing that can be taken away. Social media is everywhere. Yeah.
And you could see, despite you blowing things up with your Barbies and the G.I. Joes, your parents could usually see or know what you're doing.
It's true, yeah.
But, on phones and social media spaces, it's really hard to observe
because
that.
You could be texting, saying all kinds of stuff and going back and forth with people online, and you have no clue. At least with Barbies, you can hear them talking out loud and be like, okay, what are you talking about? Why are you talking to your Barbies like that? Like you can at least get a sense of where their mind is of like appropriateness. You can't do that with social media, and that's the scary part about it. And so I do think we have to have some type of an age limit for our kids before they get on, because I do think our kids have to fully understand the difference between right and wrong and really have this notion of morals and ethics and what's appropriate and versus what's inappropriate before they can just get on social media.
Mm-hmm. And like you were saying, perceptions, body perception, image, all of that, and which also rolls into what we were talking about Barbie, in a different era.
Right. Because now Barbie got the hips and butt and everything else. Before, Barbie couldn't see anything. Just I felt like Barbie just had breasts. Like, I think that was like a big breast implant time.
Yeah.
It was like,
you're a kid playing. It was like, I don't know what that
is. It's true. I'm like, they should just have flat chested Barbie. The ones from the dollar store, I feel like were more like just basic, like the real like janky plastic ones that you could just pop off the arms.
The hair's falling out. Yes. If you're just joining us, I'm here with Naila Ansari. I mean, your resume, Africana Studies professor, you have your doctorate, you are a performer, a choreographer. So when is the presidential run?
I don't know about presidential
mayor.
I don't care for politics, but I think For me, I enjoy helping the community, and that's really important to me. I think, using the different things that I've accomplished in my life in different formats of between arts and culture, and also like administratively, and being able to be a professor, and I feel like all of those things just allow me to help the next generation. I don't think keeping anything to yourself is helpful at all, because we all are going to go someday. And so it's important for me to be able to leave a legacy. And I don't think that always has to be a political one. I'm someone that I think I do a lot better behind the scenes, and I think that is something that is a gift for me, because I love networking and bringing people together. Like, I think that is a gift of mine, to say, hey, this person's really good. You all need to work here and do something and make it happen.
Yeah.
And so I like to kind of stay that way. There's too much divisiveness. My personality doesn't do well with crazy. So because crazy don't know it's crazy, so I can't do much with that. But I can help my people, and I love, getting folks to the next level and building up the next generation.
There's been a focus in recent weeks on what's next. There was a whole Black Joy segment, especially around May 14th, and we're going into Juneteenth. And I know you've repeatedly mentioned like really strong aspects of love, justice, joy. How do you focus on those things when today we're talking about Barbie, which is a pretty light subject, but can be a heavy subject. So how do you keep Black joy in mind and spread joy when you are in trying times and we're getting into a year that's going to get a little bit sketchy? What are some of the ways that you do that or help that? Because I know you're in theater.
So I started about 5 years ago, and I was getting my MFA. And the idea of Black joy for me was coming through Black women. And so I've been researching around the country on Black women joy, and what does that look like for us, and how do we cultivate our joy? How do we archive our joy? And I recognize that from the different interviews that I have, and also working, kind of through my own stuff and difficulties as a Black woman, that it happens in 4 places. It happens in play, it happens in community, it happens in self, and it also happens in a form of resistance as resilience. And so when we find all of those things consistently at the standpoint of, there's a lot of different spiritual teachers that will say the heightened level of spirituality, which would be joy, is contentment. And when we have all 4 of those in totality, that really is the notion for us to find our joy. And particularly when we talk about Black joy and Black liberation, because we're not going to go through life without trials, but we also have to find that time for play. We also have to find that time to have, to be with ourselves, to figure out what we need, to have that time of silence. We also have to have that time for community, because you do need a community to allow you to grow and be cultivated and get through some of those, of course, those times that allow you to be resilient, to just move on to the next thing. So those 4 things, I've always been an advocate from my research and interviewing Black women, that is the way for us to push through and to get there, where we center all 4 of those things, and we do it to get to that space of contentment and joy.
You have to make sure there's a balance, so that, I think when you are driven and you have a purpose, you sometimes forget to take care of yourself, and have that time for play.
Yes. It's true. I mean, we and Black women tend to be more of service to other people. And that's what I've noticed a lot in my research, is that we tend to want to give to other people, and we tend to mention our kids a lot, and we mention our community members a lot, but we don't always find that time for self. There's NAP ministries that a lot of people have seen that on Instagram and different social media platforms, of like Black women just finding time to rest. And that's really important, that you take that time to recognize that, like, you cannot save the world. As much as we can, like, Black women, we always are saving everybody, but that doesn't mean that we can't save ourselves while we're trying to do that. Like, you can't do it alone, and that you need to bring in folks in community to help you along the way, because burnout is very real. And a lot of Black women that I've interviewed talk a lot about burnout, even though it may not be that word. That notion of, like, everyone's just really tired of fighting all the time. And in order to kind of keep going through the world that we live in, you have to be able to find that time to rest and be able to take that time for yourself.
So instead of trying to take everything on your shoulders and, there's always these big picture fights all of the time. What are the small ways that you can kind of break those things down?
Oh, yeah. So small ways. I actually have like a little baby trampoline at home. And I know this sounds like really ridiculous, but I get on the trampoline in the morning. It's my son's, but I use it. And I just do I put my jam on and I just jump and just get down with the get down on my baby trampoline. And
I might have to try that. Secrets of Naila.
It gets me going.
Yeah.
There's different times always finding a way to meditate for yourself. I think I don't always agree with people telling other folks how to meditate. There's different practices. There's a lot of different exercises that people do, but taking that time just to see what that is. A meditation can be a walk. Like you do a daily walk outside in the air where you're just silenced to yourself, and you do that as a form of meditation, or sitting down, just even being in your bed a little bit longer than you normally do. Close your eyes and just be at peace and just try to just not think about your schedule, just go with the flow. I'm a big music person, so there's like always music playing in the house. Get your, whoever, Anita Baker, even though she comes late to her concert, Sade, whoever, you just get... get your music going. That's always a different tip that I use. And then sometimes just going out with a friend, and they could just say, hey, we haven't talked in a long time. Can we get together and catch up? So those are some little ways that I always find some joy here and there.
Yeah. And, and you have to take the time to do it. Like the trampoline suggestion.
It's great. I just pulled. I was trying to figure out what to do. I was like, I need something to do. It's like really started kind of during COVID. And like we were all trying to just like figure out ways to like get an exercise and just to get everybody's just like stressed in the house. Like, how do we get it out? So I got a trampoline, and then I just started jumping. I was like, this feels really good. I'm just.
I'm gonna have to get one in the office. Charles will be all about that.
Yes, come on, Charles, get on the trampoline.
And it is important. We started this conversation about Black Barbie, and we're talking about play, and it's important for kids to take breaks too, right? Because there's more and more demands on kids.
And we live in a culture right now that like the kids have 50 million activities, and we're trying to like, put them in this, put them in this, put them in this, or we like can't really watch them, so they're in like some type of after school program here, after school program there. Kids need just as much quiet and silence as we do, and it's only going to help them as they get older, because the silence is louder than anything else will be when it comes to decision making, because you can't make decisions when there's a ton of chaos around you.
Yeah.
Right. So if we start to teach our kids now that, not necessarily a timeout because they did something they were supposed to do, in the sense of like, what, let's just take a moment, let's reflect on what our day is, what happened, what can you do better, and to have that time for themselves, I think is really important that we start to have our kids do just for a little bit. And it doesn't have to be long periods of time, but there's so much going at them and like trying to keep up with like the world of like just everything, like putting our kid in everything.
Yeah.
They have to find some time for themselves. Like I'm always an advocate of kids learning how to play by themselves.
Yes.
Like I think I don't want to feel like I have to give you attention every 2 seconds for you to survive.
Yeah.
Like that's not going to be helpful for you as an adult.
And they do say that kids are so overscheduled, they're not really learning how to use their imagination and think through those processes. So that's why it's important now more than ever to have play and to have Black representation in toys.
Yes.
What do you want? Everybody's going to be, there's always ways to be critical of everything we watch, of documentaries, especially in media. What do you think some of the good things you would want people to focus on, while watching the Black Barbie documentary?
I will want people to focus on the journey of the Black woman. Because when we think about 1980 being the first Black Barbie doll, that is not that long ago.
Yeah.
And I think people have to really put in perspective the historical context in which they're watching to really say, like, we're in 2024 and people might think 1980 was like, we really have to put in time, like where we are in America, that in 2024, we just now have a documentary about the first Black Barbie doll.
Yeah.
And so I want people to really take that into consideration, but then also to see the Black joy that these women have when they did find something that looks like them.
Yeah.
And how much representation really does matter, particularly in underrepresented groups.
And what an achievement that was.
Oh, yeah.
How many years later?
Right.
It's like,
how long and by the way, this happened. Do y'all remember that? And everyone's like, no, I didn't remember that, because no one cared at the time really to make it that big of a deal, which is why we have this documentary now to say, no, by the way, like the things that like Kitty was able to get done is amazing in such a corporate place like Mattel.
Yeah. Will you try to find like black Barbies now on like eBay? Because like
honestly, I was reading a Vogue article and I saw how many collectors. I was like, oh, I don't know if I have a stand a chance, because these folks are like really out in the streets getting these. Like they have massive collections. Like one, I was reading in one of the Vogue articles that someone had to pay $1,500 to move her, but that's how many boxes she had of Barbies when she was moving that they had to ship $1,500. That was how much it cost.
Yeah.
And so like that's a real craft and like a real skill that people have when they're doing collecting. So I think now if I saw one, I would get one.
Yeah.
Now that I understand and really understand the importance of it and this idea from like a collector's perspective. But I don't know if I don't know if I can totally be a collector.
Well, and I mean, they had the traveling exhibit, the Black Doll exhibit at the Erie County Public Library. And I mean, that was like under glass pretty much.
Oh yeah. And it takes a lot to preserve. Like those are no joke. Like it's no joke preserving and like archiving materials. It's just a real skill that I think people kind of underestimate.
What do you see the future being after this? Do you think this is going to affect the toy industry? Because like you said, there's still not a lot of representation.
I would say I love to be optimistic, but I'm also a realist at the same time. I wouldn't totally put me in a pessimist category, but I will say that with what we're dealing with now politically, we are wildly under attack, and I don't know. There's such a fear. Like there's DEI fear right now. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's people quite literally being like, I can't do this because it's going to make me look like I'm discriminating against another group of people, when we already understand the effects and like how marginalized people are. So I think it's going to be tough where we are, especially with the Supreme Court we have in place too.
Well, yeah, because you need people in the rooms to make the decisions that aren't being allowed in the rooms.
Oh yeah, and people really don't understand. It's like we have affirmative action now with college admissions, and then we just have this Fearless Fund. I mean, you think a company is going to be out and like, oh, I only sell black Barbie dolls. Like that's, and that might sound minimal, but like this is what's coming. Like they're really trying to like pull back and use our own laws against us.
Yeah.
And so I think I actually think it's going to be a little bit more difficult.
Talking about, we talked about the ways that you can practice self-care and trying not to take the weight of everything on your shoulders. But when these things become so huge and you as a person and as an individual want to try to make change, I know they say like, join a board or in your community, because it's like, you're like, I'm not allowed in the Senate. I'm not allowed. Like, what are some of the things that we can do to try to help or make change in small levels?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have to educate themselves on how the system work where they are. I think a lot of people look at the system on a big scale, right? Like we look at presidential campaigns, we look at governors, but we don't tend to look at our own communities to say, okay, this actually isn't working, and nobody's really questioning why this isn't working.
Right.
There's like a small group of people that are doing it, but for a lot of people, they're like, oh, we hear them all the time. But when you start to really join those groups of people and they start to collect and get bigger, then you can start to really make change. But you have to be educated in the sense of understanding how your local government works, how these institutions work, how these different groups and organizations work where you are, right? Like, and it starts, people don't really understand. It really does start at home. So if you have a local community center that's really doing really good work, how can you advocate in the community to make sure that they are getting funds or they are getting grants and like helping them that way? So it starts, I wouldn't even say that it's small. It just starts where you are. When it's always kind of like you got to cut your grass first before you cut someone else's grass.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and so I think we have to be able to do the work in our own communities first to make sure that we have what we need, and we build a group of people to fight for that. Like, we have rights just as much as anyone else, and we can't allow a lot of our systems to make us fearful of doing that. And I think a lot of systems have done a really good job at making people fearful of speaking up and advocating for what they need and what they want.
Yeah, and just speaking up, community, starting with that, and hopefully, that will inspire some people to like feel safe to do that too, which is another issue,
right.
But
yeah, so, safety is real.
Yeah.
And you can do that, but when you when you do it and you understand your rights and you understand policies and you understand your rules of way things are system, and also ways to break those rules when they're not serving everyone else, and ways to advocate for that and make policy changes, that's where we can start.
Naila, I just can't tell you. Every time I talk to you, I feel so enriched. And I mean, I wish that I could have you, I could find some reason to talk to you every day. And
I know, I feel the same way. We always have such good combos.
And, you know, we'll both be watching this the Barbie movie
I can't
in a different way. Not the Barbie movie.
No,
the Black Barbie movie.
Yeah, we saw that enough. That's fine.
We were flooded with that already. So thank you for joining us. I know you'll be back, so this isn't goodbye. It's just see you next time.
Yes, see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on What's Next. This is What's Next on WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WUBJ Jamestown, your NPR station.